This is Making Mathematics Work for All Children, Issues of Standards, Testing, and Equity by Alan H. Schoenfeld. Robert Moses says, today, the most urgent social issue affecting poor people and people of color is economic access. In today's world, economic access and full citizenship depend crucially on math and science literacy. I believe that the absence of math literacy in urban and rural communities throughout this country is an issue as urgent as the lack of Black voters in Mississippi was in 1961. This is a huge statement. Robert Moses is a civil rights activist, and to compare math literacy to the right to vote is quite an outstanding statement. Moses' statement puts the equity issue in mathematics education as a civil rights issue. Um, Mathematical literacy should be a goal for all students. A disproportionate number of poor African American, Latino, and Native American students drop out of mathematics and perform below standard on tests of mathematical competency. This propels the argument of a civil rights issue because these students will be denied skills and the pathway to economic and other opportunities. So what he's saying is that these minorities drop out of mathematics classes, the upper mathematics classes in high school, and do not continue, and therefore they are setting themselves up, or they are being set up to work in what we would call blue collar jobs, even more like, a fast food job, labor positions, and will not have the same opportunities as those who continue with their mathematics education. Report in 1989 from the National Research Council called Everybody Counts stated that more than any other subject, mathematics was the subject that filtered out more students that lead to scientific and professional careers. I can attest to that. I was not a strong math student, so I originally wanted to be a pharmacist and got into my first math and science classes and decided that was not for me because I was not smart enough to do that. However, the dropout rate among Blacks and Hispanics was much, much higher. Changes in curricula since 1989 has helped diminish learning gaps in minorities but have not eliminated them. Also in 1989, the NCTM published standards. They went further than NRC in that they identified content that students should know, but they also focused on processes and really reconceptualized mathematics education. The NCTM's principles and standards that came after that in 2000 clearly states that equity, meaning high expectations and strong support for all students, is a vital part of learning. Schoenfeld states that true implementation of changes, evaluation of changes in new curricula takes many, many years. So it was a full decade later before they really got some good data. But that data showed that on basic skills tests, there was really no significant performance differences between the two kinds of curriculum, which now we've gone back to traditional and reform. On conceptual understanding and problem solving, the reform curricula did much better by a wide margin, he says, than traditional students that were traditionally taught. And most importantly, there's evidence that the reform curricula can narrow the performance gap between whites and minorities. The data that they used comes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania public schools. They used Pittsburgh because since they've been ahead of their time, they have tried to implement standards-based education in math and other areas. So it was natural for them to look at those schools for data. Just information about Pittsburgh: it serves about 40,000 students in 97 schools. It has about 56% African American, about 44% white, but more than 60% qualify for free or reduced lunch. This is a partial chart of percentage of students who met or exceeded the standard in a grade 4 mathematics examination. You can see that there's two sets of data, 1997 and 2000, and the way that it was set up was 1997, it was more of a traditional type teaching, and then as they implemented more reform, then in 2000 you can see that there were some gains. There is significant room for improvement in all areas, but it does show that that there have been some good gains. They also talked about strong implementation of curricula in schools that had weak implementation. In the weak implementation schools, white students outscored African American students significantly, but in the strong implementation schools, it was more equitable. African American students still lagged a little bit behind in problem solving and concepts, but outscored white students in the skills area. I have barely scratched the surface of this study. It is incredibly dense. I could have spent hours going through this and explaining it, but since I think I hold the record for the longest video, I'm going to refrain. Conclusions from this study: curriculum must be up to date and teachers well prepared to teach the students. And that's something that, we've talked about in other sessions and other brief studies. Teachers must be prepared better. They need to be better trained in their pre-service time and when they are in service with their professional development. They need to be able to teach without worrying about high-stakes testing. And we focus on that way too much. And they need to be treated as the professionals that they are. Also, the author of this study talks about how flawed the assessment system is. There are some good assessments, he says, but for the most part, the whole thing is flawed. One reason is because the assessment is not appropriate for students. I know in fourth grade reading, we don't test students on fourth grade readability passages. We test them on 7th, 8th, or 9th grade readability. And same thing with fourth grade math. When in 2012, when the TEKS changed, there were ticks that came down from 8th grade to 4th grade. And that's, our kids aren't ready for that. We need to understand that skill mastery does not have to come before application, and that we can do those hand in hand. And then we need to understand the variability of testing. From what he said in the article, and it made me think about 5th grade being an SSI year. And so we have kids take math and reading test in April now, and then if they don't pass, they have to take it again in May, and then if they don't pass, they take it again in June. And it could mean the difference between a good day and a bad day, because we do have a lot of kids that pass in May when they didn't pass in April, and they could have just had a bad testing day the first time. And it's not necessarily that they've suddenly mastered all of the skills that are tested. We also need to understand that gains in test scores are not always what they seem. And because of the emphasis that we put on testing, it can result in a loss of intrinsic motivation for students and for teachers too. I have honestly never thought about inequity in education. I've certainly never thought of it as a civil rights issue. And so this has really kind of challenged my thinking. And I hope it challenges you too. Here's my citation for this article, Making Mathematics Work for All Children, Issues of Standards Testing and Equity, from Educational Researcher, pages 13 through 25. Hope everybody has a good night.